Let's talk to Labour MP, Shadow Business and Consumer Affairs Minister Lucy Powell, who joins us. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Good morning. Well, a very important week this week, very important day yesterday for an awful lot of employers and employees as we saw the launch of the economy, the winter economy plan as it was billed, and specifically the job support scheme. Other measures, of course, in there yesterday announced by the Chancellor Rishi Sunak to help in various businesses and employers. But crucially, we saw this support scheme where we'd see employee working a third of their hours or more, the employer paying third on top, the government paying a third, employee gets basically paid for more hours than they do, but the employer gets some help from the Chancellor. Do you think these measures go far enough, too far, or are they just right?
Well, I'm pleased that the government and the Chancellor have finally accepted the principle that something more needed to be done once the furlough scheme came to an end to avoid, I think, what could be a large-scale mass redundancies across the economy over coming weeks and months if they hadn't done something. So I welcome that. But I fear that the design of this scheme won't do enough to abate those large-scale redundancies that we might be seeing, because the incentive to the employer is not a particularly good one as designed by this scheme. So the employer would be paying essentially 55% for someone to work a third of their hours, and it would be cheaper for an employer to keep a full-time, say on average wage, one full-time member of staff on, than it would be quite a bit cheaper than to keep two half-time employees on. So I think, as I say, I'm pleased that they've now accepted the principle that something needed to be done, and that was important for the country and for the tax base, that we keep people in work where we can. But the design of the scheme, I fear, just won't be sufficient to rise to the challenge.
And this is the thing. This is a markedly different level of support that we've seen. At the beginning of the furlough scheme, we were looking, 9-10 million people on that furlough scheme, £6 billion per calendar month cost to the taxpayer. This scheme, we're looking at £300 million cost over each month. I mean, that is the different scale we're looking at. And I, like you, have heard from many, particularly smaller employers saying, as you say, I may as well just keep one person on full time and it will be cheaper for me. The only issue there is whether they want to then recruit people in the future and have to train people up and want to keep people on. So it'll be a different measure. Do you think this was about Rishi Sunak, whether or not there's game playing going on within government and there is a power battle going on in terms of Rishi Sunak and Boris Johnson or not? Who knows? But actually, it was a message to the wider world and to the voters that there is going to be a huge cost to this. And if we're all going to go back into our homes and work from home, and we're all going to go home at 10 p.m. From the pubs and the restaurants, there will be a huge financial and jobs price to pay, which a lot of people don't seem to have quite got to grips with. Do you think that actually we should be paying more attention to the huge economic cost, as he told us to, rather than just to the number of deaths every single day?
Well, it's a balance, isn't it? And I think the government, to be fair, they've been trying to sort of get that balance right, and it's a very difficult balance to get right. I think having really effective test, track, and trace, though, it is at the heart of trying to get that balance a bit better. I think the absence of that at the moment has meant that we are having to rely on these ever draconian, blunt tools in order to keep the spread of the virus at bay. And that really is a problem, I'm afraid, that the government just hasn't got on top of. And they promised us a world-beating test, track and trace, and that just isn't what we have at the moment. So if it's taking a week or more to get tests back, then obviously that's going to have an impact on people's ability to work and the economy. If there isn't that confidence there in the system, that's going to have a knock-on economic consequence as well. So it is a balance. We've got to get that balance right. But we also have to remember that there are some sectors that are still completely closed altogether. And our job is to stand behind some of those businesses and jobs to make sure that when we do come out the other side, people have got good, decent work to go back to.
Well, indeed. I mean, again, there's no extra help for a lot of people who are self-employed, or indeed for lots of, the arts world, which is still completely shut down. And indeed, many of those jobs in hospitality and tourism, aviation, travel, that simply are going to disappear right now. Let's focus, though, on the testing figures, the track and trace. £12 billion it's costing us, more than £400 for every single household in this country. We're looking at only 10% of tests coming back within 24 hours. We're told this is a lack of lab capacity and a real massive boost in demand, particularly after children went back to school. But only when people are getting test results back. Now, I've been raising a lot of the concerns of people like Professor Carl Hennigan and others about how reliable these tests are, and that a huge number of false positives may be involved. The government has yet to rebut this, I have to say. But only 18% of people who are getting a positive test are self-isolating, and of people who are contacted who know someone who's got a positive test, only 11% are self-isolating. Is there any point us spending £12 billion on a track and trace system if so few people are actually taking themselves out of society to protect others? There's only any point having the tests if people are then going to self-isolate. Otherwise, there's no point spending that money at all, is there?
Well, I mean, we'll have to look back in time and see whether the money was well spent. But what I personally believe is that if there was a lot of confidence in that system, so tests were turned around really quickly, you weren't being asked to sort of self-isolate just because you couldn't get a test back, which is what is happening in a lot of cases. If the track and trace sort of app and system, you felt was working well, so that it was tracking and tracing the right people, not just somebody who you maybe sat alongside a car on the road with or something like that, then I think people would adhere to it much better. I'm here in Manchester, and we've seen in Manchester over the summer, loads of different mixed messages about what we are able to do, what we aren't able to do, and the loss of confidence in the testing system as well. So we've got to get confidence into the system. Everyone needs to buy into that and be part of it, because at the end of the day, we're only going to be able to combat this virus because everyone's pulling together and everyone is voluntarily going along with what they need to do, but they've got the financial support underpinning that to make sure that they can. Because I think the other thing you're seeing from those figures, and that's definitely the picture here in Greater Manchester, is that lots of people who are contacted by the tracking service are not in a position to self-isolate. They perhaps a taxi driver, work in the restaurant or hotel business or something like that, and they have to go to work in order to get paid. They haven't got the luxury of working from home. They've got dependent children. They've got no safety net there, and they can't afford not to go to work. So we've finally belatedly seen this extra support for people to self-isolate. But again, is that enough?
OK, well, we'll be putting a lot of those questions to a guest throughout the show. Lovely to speak to you, Labour MP, Shadow Business Minister Lucy Powell. Let's talk about this emergency job scheme. Let's talk to Conservative MP Steve Baker. Good morning to you, Steve.
Yeah.
Good morning to you. Now, Rishi Sunak announced this job support scheme. It takes state support from what it originally was for the furlough scheme, 80% for jobs that were furloughed, down to just sort of 22% from the beginning of November, when the furlough scheme has ended on October the 31st. A lot of people are saying that, look, it's any help is better than no help at all, but that actually this probably won't protect many jobs, and even if they are viable or not, because it makes it pretty untenable for a lot of employers to keep a couple of people on when it would be cheaper for them to keep just one person on. Do you think Rishi Sunak has done enough?
Well, I do think he's done enough, but the reason I think that is partly because we've got to take the full context into account. I've banged on before about the Office for Budget Responsibility's fiscal sustainability forecast. That is the long-term debt projection, and it's really a very bad picture. We're currently in a position where the Bank of England's creating more new money than the government is borrowing, and as your report pointed out, the government's borrowing record amounts. So this is a really appalling economic situation, and in such circumstances the Chancellor's got to be prudent, and I think that's what we're hearing from him. He's going to be helping the public. Obviously he's concerned to support people's jobs, and I think this package is a good balance to strike between the overall fiscal position and the need to look after people. But I have to say, there's people like events firms in my constituency, until they can get back to holding concerts and so on, they're in real trouble. So we've got to learn to deal with this virus, and I was very pleased that Rishi finished on the note of saying we've got to live without fear, and I certainly agree with that.
Well, indeed, he said our lives can no longer be put on hold. We've spoken so often about this virus in terms of lives lost, but the price our country is paying is wider than that. We need to bear all of those costs in mind. As you say, he also said, in terms of the virus, we must learn to live with it and live without fear. Completely different message from what the Prime Minister had to say, the Prime Minister echoing very much Chris Whitty and Patrick Vallance. Do we now have a rift at the top of government?
I don't in government that people hold on to a collective view, and I always said that and did that when I was in government myself. And it's also important that ministers have enough scope to show aspects of their character, and I think Rishi has a really optimistic and open character, and that came across in his statement. But I don't think there's actually any kind of policy rift between him and the Prime Minister. Indeed, everybody watching this, listening to this, will know that Boris is a big, expansive, bouncy character. He just has on his shoulders the weight of responsibility, and in particular the responsibility he has to ask the public to comply with the measures he's announced. So I'm not surprised that there was a slight difference in tone, and I really wouldn't expect that to mean a rift, no.
Okay. I mean, I think that everyone, if they are honest with themselves, would say that rather them than us having to be in charge of whether being the Chancellor right now, the Prime Minister, or the Health Secretary. And I speak as I find, and I criticise where I think things are going wrong. But,
I hardly noticed, Julie.
Well, someone's got to call this stuff out when they think things are going wrong. I think it's my duty as a good citizen, frankly. I don't live in China. I'm allowed to speak my mind, and I think government should listen to more people speaking their mind. It do them good. But this is the thing. There are quite divergent views, and I know the government has got a lot of support for its policies at the moment in terms of basically sort of going back into hiding from this virus. And an awful lot of the public would not just have a 10 p.m. curfew on pubs and restaurants. They'd have a 10 p.m. curfew on people being outside of their homes. The latest polling is showing they'd close down the pubs and restaurants altogether. Everyone would be working from home, and we would have huge infringements on our civil liberties, all for a virus which yesterday killed 40 people. Those 40 deaths are a tragedy. They are awful for those people and awful for their friends and their family. But do we, and does the government have this in perspective in terms of the damage we are doing to our society, to our liberties, to our economy, to our long-term health as a result of the economic damage, compared with the risk this virus is posing to us? Do you think we've got the balance right?
Well, I have said before that I haven't been persuaded that the measures are proportionate. Look, the thing is here, I've said before, I despise with every fibre of my being these restrictions on our liberty, and nothing about that has changed. But what keeps my feet on the ground is representing people who are genuinely and reasonably afraid of this virus because they're vulnerable. And also, I have a wonderful guy in my constituency, Dr. Raghib Ali. He's published an article today, and he's an epidemiologist and, as well as that, an acute medicine consultant, which is unusual to combine the two. And, he supports these measures, and that is a challenge to me. I can't, I'm afraid, just say they're disproportionate flat out. I need to think extremely carefully about the measures as we move forward. But, of course, the crucial point on this is I don't get a vote before the measures come into force. And that's why I and others have been saying to the government, it's time to ensure that Parliament has a vote on measures before they come into force, not after. There is time now to say to Parliament, here are some proposed measures, here are the facts as we see them. Let us ask the questions, let us debate the balance of risk, and as you say, the impact on society, on education, on civil liberties, on the economy, and then vote on measures. So as people will have seen, a number of us have now pressed the government that they need to come up with a solution that lets us do that.
Just to get people up to speed, this is the so-called Brady Amendment. It's an amendment to the emergency powers legislation that comes back next week. By the way, only comes back because David Davis got that amendment in 6 months ago to only limit those emergency powers to 6 months, not the 2 years the government originally rather terrifyingly wanted. But Sir Graham Brady, the chair of the backbench at 1922 committee, has tabled that amendment, basically asking for Parliament to have a debate and a vote. We think up to 60 MPs, I think 2/3 at least being Tory, including yourself, are backing that amendment. Realistically, what do you think would change if there were a debate and there were a vote? Do you think that those emergency powers would be taken away? Do you think that they would actually change any government policy?
Well, the motion can't be binding. You have to do that with an act of Parliament. It's all about the politics of it, and I'm afraid, as it so often is. The motion also is a statutory motion. In a nutshell, that means it's probably not, or it's quite possibly not amendable. But we still have to make a stand and say, actually, there is a force in Parliament that says Parliament needs to take back control. These are major infringements of people's liberty right across the country for tens of millions of people, and it's right that Parliament should have its say before they come into force. So it's possible that the government will ride roughshod over us, but I don't think any government can keep riding roughshod over its own parliamentarians for very long. I think it'd be much, much better, and what I expect is the government will offer some compromise. We've had really constructive talks with Matt Hancock and with the Chief Whip, and we'd really rather be collegiate and just work together and reach some compromise, something like the Sifting Committee that came out of the EU Withdrawal Act. So there are solutions. There's solutions which can work for the government and for Parliament, and I hope we'll compromise.
Just finally, I must ask you about Brexit. We've had more negotiations yet again. I don't know what round we're on, 4,222, I don't know, in terms of Michel Barnier meeting with Lord David Frost, our representative. There is a lot of talk that there are chinks of light at the end of the tunnel and that they are coming to some agreement on some of the more difficult issues. Are you hopeful there will be a deal? Or are you fearful of having, 7,000 lorries a day being stacked up in a lorry park in Kent?
Well, I have the privilege of talking to ambassadors because of my previous work, and they want a deal. We want a deal. I think there's definitely space for a good deal. They offered us, of course, a free trade agreement back in the spring of 2018, and we've just got to iron out the technical details of state aid and, of course, fisheries. So I am hopeful that we can secure a deal worth having as we leave the European Union. That is only possible because of Boris Johnson. And that's why, of course, he continues to have my enthusiastic support.
Steve Baker and your enthusiastic support. Thank you very much indeed. Now let's talk to Christine Jardine, as I said, a Lib Dem spokesperson on Treasury matters. Good morning to you, Christine.
Good morning, Julia.
Well, nice to meet you. It's a very exciting week, not least for the fact that it's Lib Dem conference week, although a virtual week, well, as same as we've had with virtual conferences for Labour Party as well. But let's face it, all eyes on Rishi Sunak yesterday for that statement. I'll put the question to you. I'm putting to my lilisteners. Did he do enough to save jobs?
No.
Okay. Thanks very much for joining us. That was a short interview. What should he have done?
Well, to be serious, Roman, I do welcome the fact that he has recognised what we've been saying for weeks. The Liberal Democrats have been saying that he needed to extend furlough. 6 weeks is not enough, though. We would like to have seen furlough extended through to June of next year. Also, we've been talking for some flexibility and for him to look at the German Kurzarbeit scheme, and he appears to have done that. But the threshold of 30% is going to be too difficult for some people to achieve. Also, there's nothing about training. There's nothing about creating new jobs, and nothing to incentivise inward investment in the country, which we're going to need going forward.
I mean, to be fair, on the training and the investment, those are issues that he has tackled in previous statements. This was a very short statement on a very specific issue of the furlough scheme ending on October the 31st and providing something else. We weren't expecting him to say anything more on training and creating new jobs. There's already billions being ploughed into that, isn't there?
No, but what we need, Julia, from the government now is some indication that they've got a long-term strategy. People need to be reassured that the government isn't just going from crisis to crisis and responding, but has a strategy for getting the country out of this and has a long-term plan. And I think we would all like to see that. We would all welcome that if the Chancellor came back with it. And also, by cancelling the autumn statement, of course, he's put the devolved administrations in a difficult position. He will have to give them some indication of what they can expect, because they have to budget for next year and they cannot do it without knowing what they're going to be getting from the UK government.
Yeah. I mean, it's very easy to be in opposition at the moment, isn't it? I mean, I've been very critical hold on a minute. I've been very critical of the government where I think they're getting things wrong, but praising when they get things right. It's very easy to be either Lib Dem, Labour or SNP and just simply say, should have locked down sooner, should have locked down harder, should have locked down longer, should have spent more money, should, just flash the cash, another billion here, another billion there. When you're not going to have to deal with the fallout of that, not going to take the blame for the economic cost. It's very easy to simply just say, spend some more money we don't have, isn't it?
That is a fair point. It would be very easy to just sit on the sidelines and carp, and we have tried very hard not to do that. As I say, I did welcome parts of the statement yesterday, and we have done that before. We have backed the government over the past 6 months and several of the things they have done, but the country still deserves, people still deserve an opposition which will question the government. And if the government is doing the right thing, then that will become clear. But it is our job to question the government, to scrutinise them and to make sure that they're doing the right things and to suggest things like we are doing at the moment with the suggestion of a universal basic income, which we will be discussing at our conference today. That's what opposition is for. The country needs strong opposition, and that's what we're here to do.
Well, indeed, we definitely do need strong opposition. Where are you in terms of that Brady amendment on the emergency powers legislation, the vote next week? We understand some 60 MPs, mostly Tory, a few Labour, who are backing that amendment to actually have a proper debate in Parliament and a vote to extend those emergency powers. Are you going to be signing up to that?
Well, I think it's absolutely fascinating that we had a discussion about this yesterday, and so many Conservative MPs have come to apparently much the same conclusion as we did, which there are powers in the bill which the government doesn't need. Government has given itself powers which, 6 months on, we know that they're not going to be, well, we're hoping that they're not going to be using, and they certainly don't need for the management of this crisis. And I think that originally we all said, yes, let's just, we're not entirely happy with this. We want a review after 6 months, but public health comes first. Public health is the single most important thing in this.
Well, except of course that we know the economic costs of what we're doing
is
actually going to have a public health effect, isn't it? Christine Jardine, we'll have to leave it there. Lib Dem spokesperson on Treasury and other issues. Thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate that.